I'd like to call to order the Peabody Planning Board meeting agenda for Thursday, January 20th, 2022 at 7 p.m. at the Wigan Auditorium. Peabody Access Television will be airing this meeting live public access television on their social media channels. First order of business is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of January 6, 2022. Motion, please.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those,
Aye.
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 site plan and building permit review, 8 Centennial Drive. We have a letter requesting that the 8 Centennial Drive be moved from January 20th, 2022 meeting until the next regularly scheduled meeting, and will await technical review by the city. Any questions on that?
Mr. Chairman, I would move to receive the communication from Moore and Cameron Group, specifically Scott Cameron, requesting an extension until our next regularly scheduled meeting. And
Second.
grant said extension.
Second.
Second on the agenda is 13 Corwin Street.
Do we have, Mr. Chair, can we take a vote?
All those in favor of accepting and moving to the next meeting?
Aye.
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 Unanimous. 13 Corwin Street.
Am I up? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. John Kelty, for the record, law offices at 40 Lowell Street in Peabody, Massachusetts, and I appear on behalf of the proponents of 13 Corwin Street project here in Peabody. We received, I think from your standpoint as a late communication, a memo dated 1/20/22 from William Politz. It sets out that my client has complied with the requests made by peer reviewers. We have addressed those concerns that were exhibited by any of our peer reviewers or the board or the Public Services Department per se. Mr. Politz has provided a memorandum which says that these are the documents I'm in receipt of, and then he has provided, he said, the Department of Public Services respectfully requests that any decision issued by the Planning Board, which I am hopeful the Planning Board will do, for this project should reflect the following additional conditions, and there were a total of 8 conditions, and we've been able to review them with our consultants, and we're happy with them and would ask that the board, if the board has no further questions, that the board simply approve our project with those conditions placed on it. Thank you. And I do have a couple of members of our team. I think that Karen Staff here is available this evening if the board has questions.
Do we have any questions from members of the board?
Just a technical point, Mr. Chairman, I think we have to receive this late communication. So I would move to receive a late communication from Will Pollitt, City Engineer, dated January 20th in regards to 13 Corwin Street. Just move to receive, simply.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Again, any questions from the board?
I just want to clarify through the chair to Attorney Kelty. So there's a 3-page document. In essence, there's a lot of backup information, but the document, I guess, that is what we're considering here from Mr. Pollitt of Public Services is essentially a 3-page document. Even though the 3rd page says page 2, it's 3 pages. And, you know, there's a bunch of stuff about drawings, certain dates, various consulting entities and all that, and then in the middle of the second page starts condition 1, and to the middle of the third page is the condition 8. So just to clarify, Mr. Kelty, all of these conditions that are on here, we will reference maybe in a motion tonight, and your clients are okay with everything that's here.
Yes, that's true. That's correct.
Thank you. No more questions.
Any other questions from members of the board?
Attorney Kelty, probably my biggest concern with this project was the intersection with Corwin and Linfield, and I'm assuming that these monetary contributions are to explore another route of travel for the trucks. Am I correct on that?
Yes, you are correct. We're proposing a meeting which would be hosted by the mayor's office, and we would meet with several of the legislative delegates, most notably Representative Walsh and Senator Lovely. They were both in attendance at one of our neighborhood meetings. They are familiar with the concerns of the neighbors. Through the efforts of Councilor Welton, we've learned that the old railroad right-of-way that is parallel to Lowell Street and perpendicular to Corwin, it's a railroad bed that lays right behind the Stonewood Grill, adjacent to the brook, and forms the boundary of one of our boundary lines. That railroad bed we are going to pursue as purchasing it from the railroad and trying to design a roadway connection that would take us either all the way out to First Ave, or there looks to be a very real possibility of cutting it short of intersecting with First Ave, but instead hooking into one of the cul-de-sacs that extends off of Centennial Drive. So that will be pursued. That will be pursued independent of any of the boards. We have received, well, we don't have it in our hands yet, but we have closed our public hearing, and the Lucia is in the process of drafting an order of conditions, and once we've completed here, we're in a position to apply to the City Council for a special permit, which is needed for this use in that district. And all the while, this money that is referenced in these notes this evening, this money is intended to serve as seed money to put us in a position to be able to talk knowingly about what will be necessary, how much it might cost, and then part of that process would be to convince our legislative delegation that this is a shovel-ready project that the Commonwealth might consider assisting us in creating this alternative roadway.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just wanted to clarify that when Attorney Kelty is speaking about the orders conditions, and he mentioned Lucia, that's our conservation agent, and he's speaking about the Conservation Commission.
If I may, Attorney Kelty, what about the railroad bed going easterly from the site? Is that to be considered at all, towards Summit Street?
No. The mindset right now, not necessarily mindset is probably too strong, but the thought process right now is to be looking at going to the right. As to whether or not it makes sense to, also hook up with Summit, that's, I think, when the agency determines that it may sell, I think that it will probably sell the whole strip. But I've not really been thinking about, nor has our team been thinking about what would happen in the easterly direction. But it makes sense that they would abandon that as well.
Any other questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, through you, for Mr. Kelty. You know, in the conditions, it says that $35,000 to develop a concept plan in the bypass roadway to alleviate traffic. I'm assuming that's for that entry and exit way going into current, and so that's $35,000. They got another $150,000 for off-site work. When I look at that road, and I drove down there today, is that, you know, there could be substantial amount of money spent on sidewalks. I know there's some granite sidewalk there, but there's some missing down by the site and over by the beginning of the roadway, and maybe some, you know, widening of the street, and then, of course, the curbing coming into the Corwin itself to widen it or bring it back or get it so those, you know, the big trucks can make the swing in there and so forth. And to me, and maybe a few trees on the sidewalks or whatever, to me, you know, that is going to be more than $35,000 to the improvements that I think are necessary for that area. Hold on a second, Drew. And then, so instead of $35,000 for that and $150,000 somewhere else that could be in West Peabody or, you know, or some other place, I would suggest that they fund a little bit more money in that $35,000 and go ahead and make that street, which is kind of not pretty and not functional at this time, you know, and especially, you know, with the sidewalks doing the handicap thing and so forth, that they spend more than $35,000 and allocate more than $35,000. So that's the only question I have. Is there a way that we can increase the amount of funds for that specific street rather than bouncing it someplace else in the city?
I can address that. Yes, there is a way. We had actually suggested that we were offering $185,000 total, which would be not necessarily for any specific issues, but instead to provide, as I described earlier, to provide seed money to try to get somewhere down the road with respect to trying to determine whether an alternative roadway was able to be pursued. Our allocation was not necessarily dedicated to anything specific to this project. I believe that if we need to make improvements to the intersection, as you said, there are two impediments to that, and they aren't money. The impediments are that the property on both sides, if it needs to be widened, there needs to be a negotiation of an easement from the property owners who aren't us. So we were trying to say, here's a lump sum of money. We think it should be seed money, as I said, for the alternative roadway, but if there is some money that wants, I think that's why the reference is made to the 150 being used for kind of unnamed improvements. We don't object to where that money is used, and if you wanted to try to modify it so that some of that money became available for that intersection, I think that's...
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but, you know, we're talking about construction of a site on Corwin down there, and why not use the money for that general area down there as much as you need? And I understand about easements, and I'm not talking about the easements. I'm talking about sidewalks, you know, and whatever, you know, whether you know, after the construction's done, whether that street needs to be repaved or whatever. I just don't like the fact that it's limited to $35,000. There's $150,000 going somewhere else, and you know, so I would like to see that increased, or just make a general statement that there's $185,000, of which the first choice should go, and the preference should go to any necessary improvements that need to be done on Corwin. And then whatever's left, then it can go in some sort of a general fund for the rest of the city. I mean, come on, we're doing construction down there. Let's use, this basically free money for everything we need down there to make that road, which looks awful, make it look pretty, And like I said, if it's curbing and handicapped ramps and so forth, and a few trees, and maybe repave if it needs to be done, or, whatever.
John, I just want to clarify here. That $35,000 is for a concept plan. That 35 to bypass the roadway, and I know that Attorney Kelty can maybe provide more information, and I think you have with the state legislature that you had mentioned. So that is for a bypass plan. Then there's 150, so that's not for Corwin Street improvements, that's for this plan. Then there's $150,000 for off-site improvements. Then I also want to clarify, I believe Corwin Street ends at a certain point, and your client owns a portion of the roadway as well, where they would have to provide the items that you had mentioned.
Through the chair.
That's true, that Corwin ends just over the railroad track that used to be. And we had always kind of viewed whatever improvements need to be made to Corwin would, in all likelihood, fall onto, on our plate. We didn't decide this 130, the 35 and 150. If the board wants to push back on that, that's kind of between you and Public Services.
I don't know if it's pushback or not, but Drew, I mean, is this just a vaguely worded, I think to Joe's point, is this just a vaguely worded sentence in this letter? Is the intent that the 150 is spent on roadway improvements related to this project and not in West Peabody, or, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's
Right.
what Joe's searching for. Is that just an oversight, or is it intentionally vague?
I can't address that because I didn't draft it.
Just Drew, do you know what the intent was of? I hate to ask you for intent, but do you know it?
So I can't speak for the intent of Will Politz, who provided this memo, but I believe that $150,000 is in response to the Linfield Street plan that was provided to the applicants that showed roadway improvements, and this money is then to help improve on that. But as the intent of why, I
I think we might feel better if it's, whether it be on Corwin Street or the intersection of Corwin and Linfield, it's just tied to this project, would be, sort of an addition to the sentence. But
I might
that's what Joe's
suggest
searching
that since there's a ways to go before, and that certainly includes the special permit process, that we adopt this report with some sort of caveat that the planning board might take up with Public Services Department exactly where that money may go. We're fine with that.
And so it's my experience in the past, being on the board for over 10 years, that when they say off-site improvements, the Bartholomew Street project, next thing you know, out on Linfield Street, a mile away, they're doing work, or they're doing some work over in West Peabody somewhere. So that off-site really throws me off, because off-site could be off-site on Corwin. It could also be off-site on Main Street in Peabody, putting new curbing in down there. And so what I'm saying is, if the contractor needs to make a gift to the city, that you should take preference on the business at hand and the development that's happening there and what's right around that and surrounding area. That's all. I just think that it needs to be tightened up a little bit, because I've seen it in the past many times. This off-site money goes, other places.
Dr. Otto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what my colleagues on the board have said, but I also want to ask about condition 1C, which seems to refer to additional monies that will need for a plan to improve Corwin Street, approved by Public Services, and the improvements to be constructed and bonded at the applicant's expense prior to the issuance of a building permit. And I'm wondering if that is a whole additional set of expenditures that is not accounted for inside the 185,000.
I believe you're correct, that that would be a different expenditure. You're correct.
Thank you.
I'm not a lawyer, but I'm reading this document, and the wording regarding the funding is light, I'll give you that. But this memo pertains to this project, period. Not about, for Joe's sidewalk in West Peabody. This funding, as I see it, is for this project and around this project. So myself, I'm all right with this.
The fact that it references, John, that it says proposed roadway improvements, does that tie us directly to this? It would seem, but,
I believe it does. However, I'm not an attorney. You are.
I do agree that that's.
I did have another question, Attorney Kelty.
Just one response to your response is I respectfully disagree with you.
That's good.
With that keyword off-site, I've seen it, you've seen it in the past.
Oh, yeah, but off-site.
So I'm just
off-site-
trying to tighten this up, bring the reins in and bring it into that little circle on Corwin.
But anything, like the intersection of Corwin and Linfield is off-site. It's off the site. Corwin Street is off the site. And if they do attain this railroad right-of-way, that's off-site also. But again, the memo refers to this project. The funding, I believe, refers to off-site around this project. And another point for, a question for Attorney Kelty, the railroad right-of-way, if it does come to be, it can be purchased, whose funds are being used for that? City, state, the proponent?
The hope would be that it would be close to or be considered a shovel-ready project that would put the Commonwealth really in the driver's seat with respect to the bulk of the money.
Okay, now let me take this a step further. Where it's public funding, supposedly, to procure this land, my thought earlier was if the proponent is going to purchase it, would that be a private way? Will this road, or proposed road, be a public way?
Our thought process would be yes. It would be public, and part of the reason for that would be there are a couple of users behind us that generate a lot of traffic, truck traffic especially, and it would be of considerable benefit to those operators there right now, as well as it would become beneficial to any future users of those back buildings. So I believe, yes, it would be public.
And I realize this is so far out. If it is a public way, it should be built to public standards with at least a sidewalk down the road. All right, thank you. That's all I have at this point.
Just one quick comment dovetailing on what you were saying, John. If that were ever to come to fruition, this utilizing this 80-foot right-of-way for a road that would likely take you to the cul-de-sac at the bottom of Tech Drive, and then up to Centennial, and then down Centennial to the highway, that's a win for everybody. And that'll probably take 3 or 4 properties that are being currently underutilized and likely make those properties have a lot more value for redevelopment in that area. And then the people on Linfield Street get a win as well, right? Because the truck traffic comes off of Linfield Street. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Just because it was brought up, I reached out to city engineer William Politz, and he's going to jump in on the Zoom to help answer the questions that the board might have. He's just getting it set up.
Mr. Paulus, can you hear us?
he is not on yet. When I see him on there, I'll unmute him.
Mr.
He hasn't jumped on yet. Just while we were waiting for Will, I just had one question, and you might be able to help me. And I noticed that Karen Staffier is here as well, in case Jack, you might not be able to. But I'm just looking at condition number 8, which states 18 months after the occupancy permit has been issued, applicant shall conduct a post-occupancy trip generation and parking demand review. This review is to confirm if the actual parking and trip generations are consistent with those included in the traffic study. Do you know, and I guess we can ask Will this as well, just to clarify, but is your client willing to make changes if it is deemed more impactful than what's said? Or I guess less impactful as well?
I know that we had offered to revisit our traffic studies, and I would presume, unless Vinod or Karen are here to correct me, but I would presume that yes, if that 18, we had offered generally to revisit that issue, and what Will has done is Will has put a time standard on it, which is the 18 months. So as to the improvements that might arise out of that, it would be our expectation we'd need to make them.
Thank you.
Suppose that issue that Joe's raising is probably most easily addressed if and when you feel it should be, by suggesting that 1A2, there be language suggesting that provided there is a nexus to the instant project for these improvements, that they somehow be related to each other, because they could still be, as we've already discussed a little bit, they can still be off-site, because as John is saying, if it's not on our, four walls of our property boundaries, then it's off-site. So that's why I suggested, language that might say, provided there's some relationship or nexus to the instant project proposal.
Mr. Chairman, and I understand your definition of off-site is that, the square footage right there of the building itself that of the proposed proponent, anything is off-site off of that. But however, in the many years on the planning board, off-site also has a different meaning. It means, fixing a sewer system in West Peabody or fixing something downtown. Off-site means anywhere in the city in some respects, as well as off-site could be 3 feet off of the proponent's application here. That was my point, and I would just like to see some beautification and some meaningful improvements right in the area itself.
Paulus, can you hear us? Flag is up. Is he muted?
Are you able to hear us, Will?
Oh, yes, sorry. Couldn't. Hi, for the record, William Collins, City Engineers for Public Services Department. Happy to answer any questions you may have. I unfortunately just jumped into the meeting now, but from understanding from Drew, there was a question or concern about the vague nature of the off-site improvements. So in talking to the mayor earlier today, the intention is, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, I don't have the memorandum in front of me, it's it's approximately $30,000 to do a concept plan to get the tractor trailers and vehicles off of Linfield Street and out to Centennial Park. I think that was roughly the number. The city wanted to, and I think the other number was 150,000 roughly, was to do originally improvements to the Linfield Street corridor. The city wanted to keep the option open to either use that larger amount to do improvements to the Linfield Street corridor or further develop the concept plan to get the vehicles off of Linfield Street and out actually onto through Technology Drive to Centennial Park.
Does the board have any questions for Mr. Politz?
Thank you, Mr. Paulus, for joining. Is there a motion required on this?
Karen, I noticed that you had raised your hand. Do you wish to make any comments on this as well?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I was just texting here with Vinod, and everything that Mr. Paulus just said is exactly what, if he didn't jump on, I was gonna share. So nothing to add at this time.
Peter, you're all set?
Yeah, I just, to clarify what Mr. Paulus just said, what I think I heard is that the money that's proposed to be allocated to the actual improvements, the mayor would like to have the option, or the city to have the option of using that money, as Joe pointed out, for improvements that have nothing to do with this project. That's what I think I heard. Could you clarify that?
I don't think that's what.
Sure, I'm not sure what the previous comment was, but what the city would like to use the money for is either, like I said, the Linfield Street corridor, or to develop an access road that would take the vehicular traffic off of Corwin Street. So the trucks wouldn't go from Corwin to Linfield Street, but the trucks could go from Corwin to Technology Drive and out to Centennial Park to gain access to 128 Route 1 that way, and to get them out of the neighborhood and to get them up into the industrial park. So it would be to develop potentially a road that would connect Corwin Street through roughly the Pan Am Railroad right away out to Technology Drive. So it would certainly, I would think, be linked to this project. The reason that the road would be created would be to get these trucks off of Linfield Street itself.
Mr. Chairman, if I may continue through you to Mr. Paulus. I understand that the second part of what you said clearly would relate to alleviating traffic that arises directly in connection with the project, but it's just the terminology, make improvements to the Linfield Street corridor. What is the scope of the Linfield Street corridor, and could that possibly mean using some of this money for things having nothing to do with the project?
Sure, that's a great question. So we use the terminology Linfield Street corridor because I think that's what the applicant had proposed in their proposal. They're the ones that came up with the dollar amount to use to alleviate, I'm not concerned, it's not to alleviate, but to make improvements to the Linfield Street corridor. And that's based upon a study that was done by World Tech Engineering and that was provided to the applicant when they filed. So any project that we would pull from that would be from the World Tech report that the applicant had reviewed through, and they're the ones that had initiated, I guess, the suggestion of providing a monetary value to the city. So there's nothing specific, I guess, I could point to tonight that said that the money would go to this, but it would be listed in the World Tech report that was given to the applicant.
Thank you.
Any other questions from Mr. Paulus, Karen Schaefer, or from the board? Hearing none, I'll accept the motion.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, in regards to 13 Corwin Street, I would recommend permit to issue with the conditions. The applicant comply with the conditions laid out in a public services memo dated January 20th. On pages 2 and 3, there are 8 conditions. Additionally, the proponent must be granted a special permit from the City Council for this project.
Second.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take a roll call. Attorney Arvanites,
Yes.
Mr. Simoes,
Yes.
Mr. Gagnon,
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
Dr. Otto,
Yes.
Attorney Cooper,
Yes.
Chairman Betancourt.
Yes.
Passes.
Passes unanimous. Thank you all for your courtesy and attention.
And thank you, members of the board and members of the Department of Public Services for their capable and prompt review of materials we placed in front of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appointments? None. Any questions on correspondence?
In your packets, online packets, you would have seen that there was a public forum notification for the Peabody and Salem Resilient North River public forum presentation. So I just put that in your packets as well to make you all aware. I believe it's next week that it's taking place. On Zoom, I believe, or online.
Chairman, could I ask a question regarding that, joint bike trail, a multi-use trail with Salem to Drew, if you don't mind? Just a quick question. So I understand this is a recreational, possibly transportation. People ride their bikes from Peabody, walk to go to the train station? That's one of the main purposes of this, right?
So this is, I was come on and say it's not my project, I'm not working on this. Brendan Callahan, the Assistant Director of Planning, would be the one to best answer your questions. But yes, the idea is that the city is currently working on moving forward our Riverwalk in the downtown, which is a multimodal pedestrian pathway or walk along the downtown North River. It makes sense that there's a railroad bed that continues into Salem, and that to work with Salem to connect to their pathway that's also along North River, and this is part of that project.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, but was there also a flooding component to this? Because there's certain areas of this proposal that flood, and it seems very silly to me to spend money on doing this if you don't at the same time address the flooding.
So I can't
Okay.
speak to directly what's
I
being
thought
done.
you were more involved in it, that's all.
Yeah, I can't speak to directly what's being done to due to flooding, but I can tell you that I'm sure it's working on either mitigating said flooding or doing something such as the East End Veterans Memorial Park, in which case, you know, it's a resilient park that it's made to flood.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Moving on to City Council special permit request, 26 Holly Street, 8 Andover Street, Wilson Square Garage, and 210 Andover Street. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. Other matters properly before the board? Hearing no request for comment, this time we'll accept the motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Who seconded that?
Second.
Thank you.